we've created a group called Visualizing End of Life Issues. So that's what we do. And so we advocate for people understanding through visual storytelling because it feels more accessible sometimes than, finding your way into a conversation about dying, death, grief, and loss.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Glam Reaper podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Muldowney, aka the Glam Reaper. And on today's episode, we have Jill Greenbaum, and she is here to tell us all things creative. I fell in love with Jill after watching her presentation on Lifting the Lid Festival, which is a UK based festival. It's entirely online, it's over a whole weekend. It's a lot. It's a lot. But it's really great. I mean, I don't know if I actually would. I must reach out to them and find out, does anybody stay awake for the entire thing, because it's happening all over the world. And so it's yeah, there is no breaks. It's 24/7 for the whole weekend. Anyway, without further ado, Jill, welcome.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
So tell us, Jill, a little bit about. So obviously, I know about you from your workshop, and it was so fascinating. I'm so glad this is a visual call. Not that I'm asking you to do any of your good create stuff, but if you can give the people who are listening to the podcast, and then obviously on YouTube, if you can give us a taste of who you are, where you're coming from, and what it is that you bring to the table, because I think it's great.
Absolutely. Well, it's been a long and varied path, super fun all the time. I used to be a million years ago a teacher of children with special needs in New York City. So, teacher, principal, administrator. And that was back in the day where you had to be super creative in terms of
Mhm.
having materials. And so, my background is in education. I have a doctorate in curriculum development. So, I love to create things. Like, I learn and then I create things. And so I'm also a visual practitioner, which is what you were seeing during lifting the lid. And that is that I teach people to take their thoughts, their questions, and their plans and to draw them through simple. We make marks all the time. Most adults would say, I don't know how to draw. And yet we do because we write all the time. Or maybe a little less now because of computers, but still we have the capacity. And so I've been a visual practitioner for gosh, over a dozen years. And that means that I do my own visual storytelling and I teach other people to do the same. And um, quick story about that is there's, of course, people around the world that do this kind of work. There was a conference, there was a woman there from Thailand that taught volunteers in a hospital to listen to patients because the patients felt they weren't being listened to by their doctors or nurses. And in listening to the patients, these people, these volunteers drew their story. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can bring my skills to doing this kind of work. And there were a half dozen women in North America that were on the same call. And we decided to come together. So we've created a group called Visualizing End of Life Issues. And so that's what we do. And so we advocate for people understanding through visual storytelling because it feels more accessible sometimes than, finding your way into a conversation about dying, death, grief, and loss.
Yeah.
And so that's pretty much how I came to all of this. I am also a chaplain in the Zen Buddhist tradition. That's a little more recent, and a death doula and volunteering in a local hospital. I do everything though through visuals. And so that's how we met each other on Lifting the Lid.
And tell everyone a little bit about just obviously a small synopsis of the workshop that you did in Lifting the Lid, because it was great.
Absolutely. And it's funny you should say that because I'm thinking back to I had done one last year and the year before last. But last year, it was really about creating a zine or a visual, a one-page visual, a visual story of how you envision the end of your life. And so I offered up some prompts to people. Where do you want to be? Who do you want to be with? What are your wishes, hopes, and dreams? Imagine your burial. And so people either created like an 8-panel zine
Mhm.
and that had a panel to tell their story or one visual. But what preceded that, and I think was helpful, and you were talking about it, is that I taught people to draw simply, right?
Yeah.
To really deconstruct things that we look at and go, gosh, I could never do that. And go, yeah, sure you can. And we did a bit of
Mhm.
that in the hour that we had. So it was like, woo, it was so fast.
And it's so true, honestly. I mean, I often say that I was definitely more on the artistic side than I was on the musical side growing up. And art was sort of always my outlet. But there's music and there's art in everyone. It's just it's deep down for some people. It's not good maybe for some people, but there is you have the ability to draw, you have the ability to make music. It might not be good music, it might not be a good drawing in standards, that are out there or whatever, but there is that ability. I mean, I think I maybe mentioned this to you when we chatted afterwards, but years and years ago, and if any of these people are out there, they'll understand. But if they're listening to this, but many years ago, I was part of a networking group, and it was a business networking group, and I was known as Dead Girl because I was the only one where they're representing sort of anything end of life. That quickly changed, thankfully, to the Glam Reaper once my book came out, and I got thank the the newspaper did that piece on me. But Dead Girl it was for a while. And so we were up doing this brainstorming session in this networking group. And the leader asked everyone, he said, okay, I want you to draw a circle and I want to put you at the center of it, right? So you're in the middle of this circle. And now out of that, we're going to do, one of these like spider drawings. And when he came around to look at everyone's piece, he just started roaring laughing when he looked at mine because I had literally drawn a stick figure, Jen, with like pigtails and a little skirt and her arms in the air. And it was just a basic stick figure. But he was just like, Jen, that just epitomizes you and who you are. Everyone else wrote their name and stuff. And it was just something just so basic, but it just gave me such joy. And it also, when I looked at my page in comparison to somebody else's, it did represent me because that is
Right.
that little stick figure, with her hands in the air, enthusiastic as everything. That absolutely represented me and who I was and what I wanted this circle around me to sort of be around was this person.
Mhm.
So I think it's very interesting what you're talking about. And I think it's fascinating to ask people to draw what they envision at
Mhm.
the end of their life. Do you do when you've done workshop, I mean, how I guess does this come into reality? Do you go to hospices? How does this work to the like there's people who listen to this podcast and they're in the funeral space and they're in the end of life space. And then there's people who, up until 20 years ago was me, which just has nothing to do with end of life, but just curious about this space. So if you can relate, Jill, as to what you do and how that works in reality, I guess.
Right. Absolutely. It works in a variety of ways. And I want to pick up on something you said also, which is that what I'm teaching people to do is not about making art, which is wonderful, but it is about communication. It is
Mhm.
about getting your ideas across. So when you created you with the stick figure and the pigtails, that was truly you communicating about yourself. And so
Yeah.
my drawings are super simple. I mean, there are certainly people in the field that do much more artistic work than me, but what I care about is the message. And they get across,
Mm.
I get it across, but in different ways. And so I do it in a variety of ways. I teach workshops like lifting the lid to teach people to do their own work, which sometimes inspires them to say, I'd rather tell Jill what I'm thinking and have her draw it for me. All
Mhm.
right. And so that's an opportunity that I do with clients. I also volunteer for a variety of organizations, one of them being End of Life Choices New York, which is about medical aid and dying. And they were doing Giving Tuesday, which we have here in the US. I'm not sure if it's around the world or not, but when you give to charities. And so I offered up my drawing skills to people that gave donations to the organization. So
Mhm.
I do that also. As a death doula, I also am with other volunteers, and so talk with them about the work that I'm doing and offer workshops or the same kinds of opportunities. And so I have to say I've always been more on the fringes after leaving education, being a consultant for over 2 dozen years. So I tend to do the more person to person types of interactions in finding people. So I find groups and I can always I mean, we're all gonna die, right? Not that we talk about that, but you and I know that. But when I tell when I'm at an event and I'm drawing what the speaker's saying, so it can be any kind of event, because that's how I take my notes. Everything is a
Mhm.
visual for me. And they
Wow.
say, "Oh my gosh, that's amazing." I said, "Yes, and it's used for this, and it carries into all these other kinds of areas." So very much to your point, it is applicable for In just so many different ways, in so many different professions, right? If you're sitting with a client as a funeral director and you wanna be thinking about, well, what do they want? Well, it can be a conversation and somebody can take notes, or it can be a visual, and that's something that the person leaves with, the funeral director has, or the death doula, or whoever it happens to be, and it's something that can be referred to, right? When we're talking, our words disappear into the air. And so there may be misunderstandings. There may be things that are forgotten. And the reality is, if there's a drawing we can refer to that says, this is where I want to be, this is who I want with me, this is what I want the funeral to look like, this is just all of the things that you and I know about that people need to be thinking about and imagining. If it's all on paper, it can be seen and discussed.
Yeah. And it is interesting, like in the courses that I teach, whether it's a celebrant or we've a pet loss one or we've an Irish tradition one, different things like that. I have actually usually, I'm very cognizant of when I'm doing the course, people do learn in different ways. There are visual learners, there are audible learners, and there are people who need it written down. There are people who need to put it into practice before they learn. I'm definitely a visual person. And so yeah, for me, like I listening to an audiobook doesn't really work for me. I do listen to business ones when I'm out on my walk, but I know that only chunks will go in every now and then because my brain just goes off into it does a little dance and goes off and it'll come back and take another chunk and then it'll go off again. I don't know where it goes, but whereas, and in school, so I wasn't kind of great in school or even like a dance class or things like that. I would have to visually, you couldn't necessarily teach me things. It was, I had to watch you do it or see something in action and then I would do it. And even in what we do now, like with Muldowney memorials and when we're creating the memorials, we like to do floor plans and we like to do, sort of renderings in some ways if we can and if it's in the budget and stuff like that to just visually show people what's ahead of them. Just because that can help clarify really, right?
Keep people on the same page. And I first met you at Greenwood Cemetery because I came
Yes.
to the event that Gabrielle put together, and I also do sessions for volunteers and also for members and guests. And so I have a workshop in which I teach people to create their visual obituaries, which is really drawing the highlights of their lives or the important points or some of their challenges, whatever's important to them. So I have a variety of prompts that I give them in terms of creating their visual obituaries. And I've done this in person and online because sometimes online, particularly, people will make collage. Sometimes
Yeah.
one session, it's two because people want to consult with their families. They want to gather photos, they want to gather documents, birth certificates. Graduations, death certificates, whatever it happens to be, military records. And so people create in a variety of ways. And people in my field, where I test just about everything, being a visual practitioner, is the folks that I started with, they drew their own visual obituaries from the very beginning. So that it depends on where your comfort level is, but those are possibilities. There's also, as we speak of creativity, something that people can do for themselves, but that I offer in a variety of settings, which is creating impermanent earth art. And so I've studied with Jay Shilkret, who's on Instagram. He's created a program called Morning Altars, and it's literally, I'm looking out the window at my backyard. It's literally going into nature and foraging and using a seven-step process to develop altars where you have a question, that's laying on your heart or a thought in your mind, and it may be related to death, dying, grief, or loss. It may be a transition that you're facing or just something that you're pondering. But it's taking time to sit with yourself and to be in nature, to gather up things and to create something beautiful that then, just like life, will disappear, right?
Yeah.
Because we are ephemeral, as is the artwork that we create outside.
Yeah. Wow. And tell me, in your years of doing this, have you seen anybody draw anything that you were kind of not expecting or that was kind of a little wild or
I have to say, I haven't seen that. There are times where people have put some challenges that they've had and finding their way through it, where that's represented on their visual obituary. Because challenges can be growth opportunities. They can also be things that stand in the way of growth. But when people are thinking over their lives goals, right? When they're thinking of what's happened to them, what's been important or transformational or formational in some way, sometimes it is those things that are very challenging. I mean, honestly, over a year ago, our last dog died, and it's still something that sits heavily on my heart, and it has turned me towards pet loss and bereavement chaplaincy work.
Mhm.
And so I have done other artistic things. I haven't drawn him, and yet I have created little booklets. I have done various art projects and collages related to him and my feelings for him. And that's much more recent. I've had dogs since I was 4 years old, but yet in this particular case, because I didn't have these skills now, I use them in different ways.
Yeah.
That's been a source of comfort, not always easy, but a source of comfort.
It's so interesting that you bring that up because I'm going through, I guess, very similar to that. Our dog passed away nearly 2 years ago, and it's still, I still cry, if I think of her at night, or I came across videos 2 nights ago, and of her jumping around and just being her lovely little
Mhm.
self, and the joy she brought and her little paws, and oh my god, I don't want to get crying again. But what's interesting is, I have also, we had her cremated. I live in the US.
Mm.
She lived in Ireland at the time. And so whenever I go home, we still have her ashes, but we put a little bit of her, and there's a fairy trail near where my parents were living, and I got a little fairy door. I put her name on it.
Mm.
And I just wanted a little spot of where children could sort of come along. They don't know who she is or was, but that she would still be bringing a little bit of joy and whatnot to them. And then I actually got some passages glitter, biodegradable glitter that you can actually
Uh-huh.
mix with ash and sprinkle it. So it just kind of
Mm.
tied into the whole fairy trail thing. But again, like even creating that little door, creating that little space
Mhm.
and putting her there, mixing her ashes with the glitter could sound absolutely insane to anybody else. But for me, because I have that kind of creative part of me, an artistic part of me, this was just how I was dealing with it, and it's not for everyone.
Mhm.
And I'm always saying
Right.
that everything we talk about on this podcast and I've ever talked about, we are not the same people. We are all different people and we grieve differently. The Oscars just happened, recently, and amazing Jessie Buckley, the Irish actress, won Best Actress. But what that movie Hamnet showed is how people can be so similar but and love each other so much but still grieve the same thing so differently. And that was, her and Shakespeare, and how they grieve so differently. I don't know if you've seen the movie or not, but it's such an incredible movie about grief, and obviously it's about child loss, but any form of loss. And it's just, I talked about this on another, I think, episode, but again, bringing that art in. When I moved to Florida, I wanted a piece of Poppy, my dog. I wanted a piece of her here. I wanted some sort of something here. And immediately I thought, oh my God, a beautiful art piece. And I could get her and my other
Mhm.
dog, Z, and have the two of them together, and I could get them together and put them,
Mhm.
and this was all just kind of brainstorming things. And then I had the incredible idea. I will clap myself on the back, and we're now going to start selling it because it's such a great idea and so therapeutic for me. Is I got a photo of the two of them. So one dog was 16 years. We both had them both for 16 years each. We're very blessed. But one was 16 years, and then another was 16 years. So over the span of like 32 years, my whole life basically. And so one is a very old photo, one is a new photo, but I put them to get meshed them together, put the background I wanted in it, because I wanted a pink
Mhm.
theme, because Glam Reaper, hello, all things pink. And I got it made into a paint by numbers because I wanted to. So originally, I wanted a piece, a painting of my dogs in my apartment. The prices were, I think, 300 plus for an any sort of a sized one. And
Sure.
I have the artistic talent, but I just knew I wouldn't be able to do them justice. That was my feeling, and I didn't want something
Yeah,
that
yeah.
didn't look like them. I was really adamant about that. But I wanted to do it myself. So I got it done into a paint by number situation, which was honestly, Jill, the most beautiful therapeutic thing. Every weekend, I would do a couple of different numbers. And yes, is it basic? Was I using any creativity? Not really, I guess, but like it was meditative, it was therapeutic. And honestly,
Yeah.
the thing that I'm left with is beautiful. It's exactly what I wanted. It's exactly the colors. It didn't cost me, a month's mortgage, and it was just such a therapeutic process to be able to do it. So to be honest, it
Beautiful.
ticked all the boxes. Yeah. So
I mean, I think also that the idea of being an artist or artistic is too confined, right? I think there are many ways to show up. And actually, I almost wore a t-shirt today that said artist on it, which was not meant to be about me. It was meant to be that my philosophy is that we are the artist of our lives, that
yeah,
we have choices to make.
love that.
And so I love to run with that. And I think that anything that brings us that kind of joy, I mean, you're making conscious choices, you're putting time and energy into it, it is bringing you joy. And I mean, for me, sometimes when I'm doing art, also some frustration, but that is also part of life, right?
Yes.
And it's a beautiful journey in the process. I also offer to teach people Zentangle, which is a meditative art form, and not so much around grief and loss, but it is
Mm,
a practice, right? There are so many practices, whether it's painting by numbers, whether it's
mhm,
going out into nature and creating altars,
mhm,
whether it is doing mindful drawing, because Zentangle isn't doodling, which is mindless and fun,
mhm.
but Zentangle is, there's some guidelines for doing it, and yet it is extremely popular because it brings people calm and peace. And I think it's just important for us to find our way for what
Yeah.
we need when we're grieving in the many ways that you talked about. I was just at the ADEC conference, so the Association for Death Education and Counseling conference, and presented on the morning altars work that I do. And yet the thing I mean, there were so many workshops that I wanted to go to. I was like, "Quantum physics, please. Can I be in, 6 places at once?"
I
Right, but
hear
there
that.
was drumming going on, and there was drawing going on, and there was
Wow.
curating grief going on, Charlene Lamb's work. I mean, there were just so many different things that were fabulous in addition to, hardcore academic stuff, like what do we need to be paying attention to? And it was amazing and wonderful. And it was just there are so many ways for us to show up and support ourselves, and I think that's one of my challenges, which is something that I thought about when you were talking also, is that you and I know so much from being in the field, and in general, the public does not know the resources that are available to them.
Yeah.
And just
Mhm.
as you said, we grieve in different ways, and there should, in my opinion, not be judgment about how people are grieving. And so the reality is that we need to help people know what the information is so they can make informed decisions, right?
Yeah.
I'm an advocate of medical aid in dying, and it doesn't matter to me what you choose as long as you know what your options are.
Yeah.
Right? In the state of New York, we've had terramation or human composting for quite some time, and yet it has never entered the state until just a couple of weeks ago when Greenwood Cemetery, has said that they will be doing that. So they're the first folks on the East Coast. It's been happening on the West Coast for quite a while, but I'm very interested in that, and so I love telling people about what the possibilities are because they just don't know.
Absolutely. Well, yeah. And that's something, we're always talking about on this podcast, and how education really is key when it comes to end of life and funeral directors. And I know there is a massive bone of contention between funeral directors and death doulas and things like that. But I think one of the big differences that I think funeral directors are going to have to I don't know, step up their game a little bit on, is that death doulas are very hungry and eager for educating themselves, and the funeral professionals are not, because they are overworked, underpaid, overwhelmed, and it's a lot. So, when I say step up their game, that's in no disrespect to the incredible amount of work that they're already doing, but it's how do we make that education available, accessible, easy to digest, stuff like that. Like, it really, really is. It's a tough space to be in. It really is. Whether you're an innovator coming into it, whether you're generational and you've grown up in it, it really is a tough space to be in. I was just in Ireland, and obviously I'm living here in the US between New York and Florida, and then I'm in DC now as well. And it's just in every state and in every country that I've been to thus far, all I see are people in this space who are burnt out, who are trying to help, who really, are giving of themselves in many different forms, whether it's financially, mentally, spiritually, soulfully, whatever, to people. And so there's some disconnect happening, and I don't necessarily know. I don't have band-aid or the plaster big enough to help. But I feel like there's something conversations can help, you know?
Completely, and it's interesting that you should raise that because I just wrote an article for Connects, which is the newsletter for the Association for Death Education and Counseling, and it was about self-care. And it was
Mhm.
about using impermanent earth art and creating it, which can take anywhere from 15 minutes because you create an altar in your palm to something that you spend an hour or more out in nature, gathering things, deciding how the pieces will fit together, journaling about it, taking photos, whatever it happens to be. But it is the self care piece. I mean, I come out of the rape crisis and domestic violence movement. So, way back in the day, I started in college volunteering. I was the director of two different programs in New Jersey. And so, what I saw was exactly what you're talking about was staff members in these programs burning out, and
Mm.
so I started speaking about it in the late '80s at our conferences for sexual assault and domestic violence workers. Like, we need to, of course, put the oxygen mask on first, but that's easy to say and it's
Mhm.
hard to do. So when I was doing
Yeah.
a clinical pastoral education internship during COVID in a local hospital, I said to my preceptor, my supervisor, I said, "What's being done for the staff here, who are just living this, even when they go home, it still feels like 24/7." And, he responded to me, he said, "We offered a workshop for 2 hours during the workday and nobody came." And I said, "Honestly, I'm not surprised. How do you start your workday, go to a workshop for 2 hours where you're supposed to literally, almost unzip
Or
yourself in terms of your
yeah,
emotions, get
right.
get into it, and then have to put it all back together and go back to work?" And the answer is not asking people to come in early or stay later or take a vacation day to do it. So how do we make more responsive systems? And this was actually a session that Greg Adams led at ADEC. And it was interesting because he started out talking about the systems we work in, but it became an individual piece. Like, we have to do this for ourselves. And I'm like, we don't exist as only individuals. We exist in systems. So how do we help make those systems more responsive to what's needed for everybody that interacts with that system? And that's a huge question and it's not an easy thing to do, but I don't think we can look to each one of us as individuals.
Yeah, yeah. There needs to be more cohesiveness and collective thought behind it all and communication, really. So maybe we all need to take out our pencils and start
We gotta
drawing.
draw.
We just
That's
need to
right.
start drawing.
Absolutely.
We need a Jill, we need a workshop, we need to get everyone together globally, and we need to make this happen. Jill, this has been such an interesting conversation. Oh my gosh, I feel like I could talk for ages. Thank you so much. We're gonna leave all the links below,
Okay.
whether it's on the video or on the podcast. Check out Jill. You do have a couple of free resources on your website as well that people can
I did.
check out. Or yeah. Yeah, she's really, really helpful. She's a great woman for a workshop. And it's just I would just urge anybody who's planning a conference or, even gathering a few people together, whether it's your team, your funeral home, or whatever it might be, or even in your workplace. Jill is a great asset because it's just how often do we get to draw something? Like, we've all been to the conventions, we've all been to workshops and things, and there's not enough doing of things. It's listening and somebody's talking at you. So I love what you do is a collective group exercise and physically, using what is the left side of your brain, right? Yeah, a
Yeah.
little bit.
Yeah. The right and the left together. It's the best
Yeah,
combination.
exactly right. Jill, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Likewise. Thanks so much.